Climate Action Group. I also serve on the Pandemic Advisory Group and the Transitions team. Thank you to Amanda Van Lankveld and Dave Nelson, who are this morning's Zoom hosts. We're all very glad to see you here. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are guided and inspired by its values and principles. Those values and principles move us to remember that we in Northampton inhabit unceded land of the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc peoples. Our values and principles remind us to acknowledge our responsibility to face all the painful legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history, even as we affirm and celebrate the legacies that inspire us. We are here to support and celebrate one another and to renew ourselves with hope and gratitude and new resolve. If you are new or returning after a time away, welcome. We're very glad you're here. Please feel free to fill out a welcome card. Doing that allows us to put you on our email contact list. There's a link to the card in the chat. We ask that you remain muted throughout the service and turn off your videos, except during the greeting, and in order to help the technology work as smoothly as possible. We hope you'll stay for social hour afterwards. It's a great way to engage in meaningful conversations with people you might not otherwise have met. And now we'll begin our service.
Here we are, perhaps quieter now with our readiness, or perhaps restless, hoping, trusting for so many things, for connection, for communion, for inspiration, for transformation, for healing, for wholeness, for words, for music, for silence, for celebration and consolation. Here we are. Let us be willing, however we are changing, however we are changed. And now please join in saying the words to accompany lighting our chalice. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage in this time of hoping and unknowing. So our Ari families are at Arcadia this morning, doing outdoor activities and celebrating the end of the year. So I get to do the story. And this is a fairy tale from France based on a version by Margaret Mayo and with illustrations by Jane Ray. There once lived a happy king and queen whose daughter was as beautiful as a June day. One day, the daughter, Princess Isabel, fell ill. She lay in bed for days and days, getting paler and weaker, and it seemed certain she would die. An old man came to the castle. You must find 3 golden apples from it and bring apples from it. You must find 3 golden apples from a tree at the far edge of the kingdom, he said. Feed them to her and she'll recover. The king sent out a proclamation. Anyone who could find the tree and bring 3 apples from it would become rich and could also marry the princess when she recovered. 3 brothers lived on the edge of the kingdom. In their garden was a tree where 9 golden apples were ready to be plucked. The oldest brother insisted he be the one to go. He picked the 3 best apples, put them in a basket, covered them with a clean cloth, and set off. The rest of the family stayed home and waited to hear what would happen. Along the way, he met an old woman. "What is in your basket, my friend?" he asked. She asked. "Nothing but ugly toads," said the oldest son. "So shall it be," said the woman. When the oldest son arrived at the palace and announced his errand, he was shown immediately to the king's chamber. He lifted the cloth and there were 3 ugly toads. The palace guard seized him and threw him out the door and down the steep palace steps. He slunk away returned home, and when he told the story, minus the part about the woman, of course, the second brother set off with the next best 3 apples in a basket, covered with a clean cloth. The rest of the family stayed home and waited to hear what would happen. The second brother, too, met the woman who asked what he was carrying. "Nothing but slithery snakes," he replied. "So shall it be," said the woman. And of course, when he got to the palace and had the same experience his brother had, he slunk away, dejected and bruised, and returned home to tell the story, minus the part about the woman, of course. So the third son, whose name was Martin, set out with the last 3 apples in a basket covered with a clean cloth. He met the same woman who asked what was in his basket. "Oh," said Martin, "there are 3 golden apples I am bringing to the palace to make the princess well, and then I will be able to marry her." "Marry a princess?" said the woman. "You'll need more help for that." And she gave him a silver whistle. Well, you can guess the rest. The golden apples remained golden apples, the princess is cured, and the king and queen do not want their daughter to marry a poor peasant boy. They had more like a prince in mind. So they set him a test to watch over and herd 100 rabbits for a whole day and not to lose even one. Of course, the rabbits wander off, but at the end of the day, Martin blows the silver whistle and the hares come running, every single one. The king and queen make further attempts to outwit him, but Martin outwits them instead. And the king and queen finally make good on their promise. And the next day, so the story goes, Martin married the Princess Isabel, who you can be sure was very happy, for she loved him even though he was a peasant lad, and she was a princess. Please join now in singing hymn number 65, The Sweet June Days.
And now it's time for us to greet one another. You are invited to turn on your video, wave, and say hello in the chat. If you are new or newish and would like to, please say hello and tell us where you're from.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everybody. Wonderful to see you all on this hot, beautiful summer morning. Hello, hello, hello. I'll tell you who's on my screen. Catherine, Andrea, Gale, Wally, where's Paula? Sherry, Molly, Corky and David, Julie, Janet, Steve and Teresa, Amy, Fran, Nancy, Ann, Kit, the Runas, Runa and Runa, John and Christine, Kim, Janet, That's just one screen. Look at all the people on our screens. So wonderful to see you, to see your names, to see your faces. Who's that? Hi, Kathy. Hi, Teresa. Claire, Ed, Eleanor, Judy, Edith, hello. Kathy. Edith, you came early. Wonderful to see you all. Dave McSparrington, wonderful to see you. All right. It is not time to sing out our children because they are not here this morning. So we'll move on to the next part of the service. I have another bit of story for you. You're going to have to figure out how all of this fits together. It's one of those services. But this is from a book, the title is Circe by Madeline Miller. In 2019, the novelist and classical scholar Madeline Miller reimagined the myth of Circe in a novel of the same name. Circe is a minor goddess. She's a witch and she's an enchantress in Greek mythology. She works magic with potions and herbs. And she changes those who offend her into other life forms, usually animals. Some of the things that happen in Greek myth, she turns a king who resists her amorous advances into a woodpecker. She wants the sea god Glaucus for herself, and she turns the nymph Scylla into a horrible sea monster when Glaucus falls in love with Scylla instead of Circe. And in the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus' ship visits her island of Aea, where Circe changes most of her crew into swine. In Miller's version of the story, Circe's habit of turning men into pigs has come from long experience of how men behave when they happen upon her shores. This is how Circe describes it from Miller's story. She says, "When I invited them in, the men always made sure to look around greedily. They saw no signs of brothers or fathers or sons, no vengeance that would follow after. If I were valuable to anyone, I would not be allowed to live alone. So after I fed them and had them drink the wine I had laced with my potions, their leader would stand. The men watched with bright eyes. They wanted to see the freeze, the flinch, the begging that would come. It was my favorite moment, seeing them frown and try to understand why I wasn't afraid. In their bodies, I could feel my herbs like strings waiting to be plucked. I savored their confusion, their dawning fear, and then I plucked them. Their backs bent, forcing them onto hands and knees, faces bloating like drowned corpses. They thrashed and the benches turned over. Wine splattered the floor. Their screams became squeals. I am certain it hurt. I kept the leader for last so he could watch. He shrank, pressed against the wall. Please, spare me, spare me, spare me. No, I would say, no. When it was over, it remained only to drive them out to the pen. I raised my staff of ash wood, and they ran. The gates closed after them, and they pressed back against their posts, their piggy eyes still wet with the last of their human tears. I would watch them scrabbling and crying in the sty, falling over each other, stupid with their horror. It was a humiliation, a debasement. They were sick with a longing for their hands, those appendages men use to mitigate the world. Come, I would say to them, it's not that bad. You should appreciate a pig's advantage. Mud slick and swift, they're hard to catch. Low to the ground, they cannot easily be knocked over. They are not like dogs, they do not need your love. They look witless and dull, which lulls their enemies, but they are clever. They will remember your face. My pig men never listened. The truth is, men make terrible pigs. Our social justice minute relates to our themes today of transformation and transition. Our transition team is the group of people working on how Sunday morning may happen in the post-pandemic world. They came up with a set of guidelines that we sent out to you this past week. Those guidelines include our commitment to being an inclusive and welcoming multi-generational community, which means that as we introduce in-person opportunities, we'll do our best to make participation possible for those who cannot be present in person. And it also means we care about everyone's health and safety. We're relying on current medical and scientific research, and also, for now, understanding that some of us are unable to be vaccinated, we'll follow practices to protect the most vulnerable, including children. And we will continue to come up with practices that protect the most vulnerable, including children. Our guidelines include our commitment to care and compassion. This challenge is new to us, so we want to be patient and gentle with ourselves and with each other. We will also do our best to communicate clearly and regularly with the congregation in consultation with people with a variety of views and needs. And so next week, I hope many of you, as many as can, will join us in person outside at Look Park. It's called the Sanctuary Pavilion. We'll send out more details. That will be our final service of the regular year. We will continue, as I said, to send out directions and reminders. We will stream the service on YouTube and Zoom for those who can't be there in person, and we will celebrate with our flower ceremony. So I hope that you will bring a flower or two to share with someone else if you can. And if you can't, that's fine. I hope you come anyway. And we will ask everyone to wear a mask on their way to and from and in our service area. Amanda, do you want to show that slide one more time? It was in the, oh, one up, other way. There it is. We got this from another congregation and adapted it a little bit for us. Because we're in transition, because not all of us have been or can be vaccinated, and because not all of us are ready, even if we have been vaccinated, to gather with large groups of people in the same ways we did before the pandemic. We commit to care and compassion. Things are changing all the time, and this work is new to most of us. We will do our best to be gentle with one another and with ourselves. And please, please feel free to reach out if you have questions. And now, as we listen to our offertory music, we will consider helping with supporting the congregation and the organizations with which we share our morning or our weekly offering plate, our virtual offering plate. We appreciate your generosity. Our meditation this morning comes from Denise Levertov. An awe so quiet, I don't know when it began. A gratitude had begun to sing in me. Was there some moment dividing song from no song? When does dewfall begin? When does night fold its arms over our hearts to cherish them? When is daybreak? I invite you into a moment of communal silence. Our reading comes from an excerpt from The Great Unmasking, which was by David Brooks. It was in the New York Times on May 27th of this year. He wrote, "People in large parts of the world will still be enduring the ravages of the pandemic, but those of us fortunate enough to be in countries where vaccines are plentiful will be moving from absence to presence, from restraint to release, from distance to communion. This week I gave a commencement address to the Boston College class of 2021. I stood at a lectern in front of humans and took off my mask, and that was a moment of liberation. People wear masks when they feel unsafe, and for more than a year we were unsafe, and we had to wear masks. But the physical masks we wore were layered on top of all the psychological masks we had put on out of fear in the years before. Productivity is a mask. I'm too busy to see you. Essentialism is a mask. I can make all sorts of assumptions about you based on what racial or ethnic group you are in. Self-doubt is a mask. I don't show you myself because I'm afraid you won't like me. Distrust is a mask. I wall myself in because I'm suspicious you'll hurt me. As we take off the physical masks, it seems important that we take off the psychological masks as well. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it is that we have more to fear from our inhibitions than from our vulnerabilities. And many of us are thinking about how we can reconstitute and deepen our communal and moral lives. This year's grads entered college in one cultural moment and leave it at the start of another. When everything was shut down, I thought they were the unluckiest generation, but they could be the luckiest. They've survived something hard and have the strength that comes from that experience. They enter a world that's been interrupted and have the opportunity to create a different and more humane way of life. A life without masks. So we are in a time of transition, and with transition come both anxiety and hope. We're anxious because we don't know what we think we need to know to move into a future that we don't know what it will look like. And we are hopeful that the future may offer transformation, perhaps, as David Brooks wrote, an opportunity to create a different and more humane way of life. Across the state and country, in thousands and thousands of high school and university graduation ceremonies, the speeches have echoed familiar themes, like Brooks' speech, lessons from the pandemic, and affirmations of the graduates' perseverance and resilience in the face of it, as well as the usual reflections on how much the world needs their energy, their new ideas, and their commitment. Affirmations and hope for transformation. And the pictures I was noticing over the last couple of weeks in our local high school graduations tell an additional story, a particular story in this very particular time. In one of them, there's an unmasked graduate exchanging elbow bumps with the masked superintendent of schools after receiving his diploma. Smith Vocational High School, which serves Northampton and surrounding communities, usually holds its graduation at Jam Green Hall, which is a huge auditorium on the Smith College campus. And this year, the ceremony was outdoors, and they had to do it in two separate groups. The reporter wrote, "They sat on chairs lugged out to the football field and set up in 3 long rows, with every seat carefully spaced several feet apart. Seniors at Hopkins Academy in Hadley carried white carnations and wore blue robes, and every student was masked. Photos of the Northampton High School graduation show that some students were wearing masks and others not. South Hadley's senior class members were unmasked as they processed across their gym." Now, the dates of those graduations might have something to do with those differences, but not entirely. I hadn't been to a high school graduation since 2008, when our younger son Elliot got his diploma. But on June 4th, a week ago, Friday, my niece graduated from high school in Bedford. Bedford's a middle-class town. It's full of people who make their livings at tech companies or in service jobs locally and in Boston. Some of its residents work in the nearby Air Force Base. Some are retired from the military. It's actually a school that has an Air Force ROTC junior program. The ceremony was outdoors on the football field, and each of the 183 graduates had been allowed only 4 guests. There was a stage platform in front of the bleachers on the home team side, and seating on the field was assigned with chairs facing the platform in 3s, and then space between those groupings of 3. So my sister Nancy and her son sat on the field. My sister Betsy and I were the other two registered guests, and we had told that attendance would be taken. So we sat in the bleachers in the front row level with the speaker's platform. No one had checked to see who was on the guest list, so I texted Booker, who had come along good-naturedly for moral support and had planned to wait in the car, and he joined us too. We read the program and we were struck by the diversity of race and background, the list of names of the students represented. The class president was Black, the vice president was East Asian. I learned later that many of the Black students were Boston kids, but some were local. They started, of course, with a recording of Pomp and Circumstances, and the blue-gowned students waiting in the driveway beyond the field began to process. My sister said, I didn't expect to be moved, but she had brought a Kleenex to put in her pocket, so she pulled it out. In front of us on the field sat the students and their family members, and just a few feet away from us, school officials sat on the platform. Teachers were behind the graduates and families, and other unregistered guests who perhaps were a little more respectful of the rules than we had been, sat in the bleachers far away on the visitor side, and I hope they had binoculars. Only one or two people in this entire crowd, including a child who looked like she was 9 or 10, were wearing masks. And this was 10 days ago, and it felt very strange. In the space of just a few weeks, the rules about how to keep ourselves and others safe during the pandemic have changed. Slithering snakes and ugly toads have transformed back into golden apples or something else with little warning. A high school graduation celebrates transformation, a step towards independence, a beckoning toward adulthood. It's a rite of passage that is appropriately celebrated in ritual fashion. At my niece's graduation, after a lot of speeches, the graduates lined up. They mounted the stairs at one end of the platform, they waited for their names to be called, and they walked forward to receive their diplomas and walked across the stage to be greeted by a teacher and the principal before descending the stairs at the other end. A symbolic ritual, a crossing over, celebrated thousands of times on thousands of football fields and in thousands of auditoriums and gyms. We had a great view. We had a perfect view from our front row bleacher seat. Tall, smiling, confident blonde girls, some in heels, too high to manage, who strode or did their best to stride across the stage. And then they hugged the principal or firmly, confidently shook her hand. The Black girl who earlier had come up on the stage barefoot because she had taken her ridiculous shoes off and had come up to sing the national anthem. She smiled and waved again as she accepted her diploma. There was a short, pale, nervous boy who looked like he still belonged in middle school. There was a large young man whose suit was too small. There was a girl who looked away when the principal reached to shake her hand. There was an athlete who gave the school cheer. There were elaborately made-up girls in very short, very tight dresses, and my sister whispered to me, "Did we wear them that short?" I said, "No, I don't think so. Not quite that short, and definitely not that tight." There was a girl with multiple piercings dressed in black leather goth. Some of them looked excited and happy. Some of them looked scared or looked like they were about to cry. Some of them maybe would have felt better still wearing their masks. When we got back to my sister Nancy's house, I said it had been a moving service. My brother said, "A service? I think maybe you're working too hard." He and his wife hadn't made the official guest list cut, but they were there, and they had picked up the food for the family celebration afterwards. I don't know if my niece really appreciated the fact that they had come just to do that, but I know my sister Nancy did. It's what families do. We show up for each other. Do you believe in transformation? It happens all the time in myths and fairy tales. It's celebrated in rituals like crossing the stage at a graduation. In the Circe story, it's a quick and painful process as the sailors are turned into pigs. In other stories, pumpkins become carriages, golden apples become snakes or toads. With help from a magic potion or a spell or a whistle, poor young boys or girls who are kind and good and clever get to marry the prince or princess and live happily ever after. The truth is, men make terrible pigs, says Madeline Miller's Circe. Those men weren't transformed. They were imprisoned. Real transformation may be painful at times, and it almost certainly takes work. Real transformation doesn't happen by magic. If the pandemic experience has changed us or will change us, it won't be due simply to the fact that we've endured. It's worth taking the time to ask ourselves. And I think it will take time to ask ourselves and think about in what ways we may have changed. David Brooks encouraged the Boston College graduates and all of us to take and keep off the psychological masks we've been wearing in the years before all this happened. He names some of those masks: productivity, racialized and ethnicized assumptions, self-doubt and distrust, an inability or an unwillingness to be vulnerable. And he says that many of us are thinking about how we can reconstitute and deepen our communal and moral lives. I have seen signs that we as individuals and as a community have begun to do that. In living through this experience together, we have begun to challenge and see through some of those metaphorical masks. The world around us changes rapidly. Our work is ever new. And as I heard at least 100 times at my niece's graduation ceremony last weekend, we have been together in this. We have shown up for each other. Can we, as our transition team has proposed, can we commit to care and compassion? Can we be gentle with one another and ourselves? Can we continue to do our best to make it safe for one another, masked or unmasked? I know we can. I know we will. Please join now in singing hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Guide us, peace has tried us.
May love guide us. Go into this beautiful summer day. Go in hope and go in peace.